Mahatma Gandhi. That name, it just brings up images of, you know, peaceful protest, a real global icon.
Mm-hmm.
Instantly recognizable.
Yeah, but lately, when you look closer, some of his views, especially around race and sex, well, they're getting another look.
Right, there's more scrutiny now. And his whole vision for a pluralistic India, that wasn't accepted by everyone, either then or now.
Exactly. It really makes you think, doesn't it? How do we square these huge historical figures with, well, the complexities of their beliefs and what actually happened?
That's the core question.
So that's the deep dive we're taking today.
And it's fascinating, isn't it, that someone like Gandhi, so influential, is still debated so intensely? It just shows you need to look past the icon.
You really do. You need to dig into the person, the experiences that shaped him, the nuances of his thinking.
Absolutely.
So for this exploration, we've pulled together some really interesting sources. The main one is Gandhi's own autobiography, The Story of My Experiments with Truth.
Which is remarkably honest, actually. It really is a very candid look at how he evolved. And we've also got articles looking at his legacy today, the ongoing debates.
Right, bringing in that modern perspective.
Our mission, really, is to understand this multifaceted person, uncover those key early influences, get a grip on his core beliefs, truth, ahimsa, religious pluralism.
And how he first tried to put those into practice, those early experiments.
Yeah, and we'll also touch on, the challenges his vision faced later on.
And that mix his own words plus the modern analysis gives us a really powerful way to look at it. We get the history, but we can also engage critically from where we stand now.
Okay, so let's go back to his beginnings. His early life, some interesting family stuff there. His father, Kappa Gandhi, was a minister in Porbandar.
A significant role. So young Gandhi would have seen governance up close, presumably.
Presumably. And interestingly, his father was married 4 times successively.
That's right. Maybe not something he talked about directly influencing him, but that kind of diverse family setup in that era, it's part of the background. It gives you a feel for the society then.
And then he talks about these really powerful childhood experiences, the plays Harish Chandra, about truthfulness.
And the story of Shravana's devotion to his parents?
Yeah, he said they had this huge impact on him. He even remembered playing the sad part of Shravana's story on his concertina. The feeling of it.
It's striking how deeply those stories about truth and duty registered. They seem to have laid like a moral foundation very early on.
And then his schooling. A real contrast, wasn't it? Geometry was easy for him because it was all reasoning.
Right, logical.
But Sanskrit, that was tough. All that memorization.
Yeah, and you can almost see a hint there of his later focus on, learning through doing, through experience, rather than just rote learning. His mind liked figuring things out.
Then there was that brief meat-eating
Oh, yeah, the experiment.
Pushed by a friend, thinking it would make him strong, help him fit in with the English later.
But he gave it up. Partly the vow he'd eventually take, but also, practically, it was expensive.
Right. It wasn't sustainable for him then.
So even that early, you see that tension, fitting in versus staying true to his values, and practical things playing a role too.
And this one moment, it's quite intense, the shame he felt about his carnal desire right at the moment his father died.
He calls it a blot he never forgot. It shows that deep respect for his parents, but also that incredibly tough self-criticism.
Yeah, that level of self-awareness, that constant self-examination, it runs all through the autobiography. It really shows his commitment to truth, even about his own thoughts and feelings.
And one more thing from early life. The Ramayana, the Hindu epic, being read regularly before his father.
That consistent exposure to scripture, to devotional practice, it must have provided a real spiritual grounding, even as his own interpretations evolved later.
Okay, fast forward a bit. He's getting ready to go to England. Why?
Yeah.
Higher education, basically. Medicine was floated as an idea initially.
Right, but his brother pointed out, their father was Vaishnava, and that tradition emphasizes nonviolence, so dissection wasn't really okay. Law seemed the better path.
So family values, religious tradition, really shaping that career choice.
Yeah.
Not just personal ambition.
And getting his mother's okay to go, that was a big deal. Apparently, no one from his specific community, the Madhbani caste, had gone to England before.
A huge step.
So he had to make these serious vows. No wine, no women, no meat.
Those vows show you the weight of social pressure, family expectations, and his willingness to commit, to sacrifice, to get permission. and just how significant crossing the ocean was back then.
And arriving in England, not easy at all. He struggled with English, felt awkward with the customs.
The knives and forks, he mentions that specifically.
Yeah. And finding vegetarian food was a challenge. He apparently lived off sweets and fruit he'd brought with him for a while.
That initial culture shock, it really hits home. And sticking to that dietary vow in a strange place, that was clearly a priority, but difficult right away.
But England is where those experiments with diet, with principles, really start to crystallize. He joins the Vegetarian Society, gets quite involved, actually.
Name it on the executive committee.
Yeah. And his thinking shifts, right, from just keeping a vow to thinking about health, and then more religious reasons for being vegetarian.
Right. The society gave him community, but also an intellectual basis for his choices.
Right.
It wasn't just a promise anymore. It was becoming a reasoned principle.
And he stuck to it, didn't he? Despite friends trying to persuade him otherwise. One even used Bentham's theory of utility.
Trying to argue the greatest good might mean him eating meat.
But Gandhi's response was simple. A vow is a vow, can't be broken.
That firmness, once he'd made a commitment on principle, that's a core part of his character. You see it again and again.
He also starts reading vegetarian literature, finds authors like Howard Williams, Anna Kingsford.
Right, reinforcing his beliefs with philosophical arguments, not just personal feelings, building that reasoned foundation.
He did try to fit in superficially, though. Took violin lessons, elocution, but then he kind of realized this isn't really what matters for him long term.
That developing self-awareness, focusing on what truly aligned with his inner values, his bigger goals, less about just surface appearances.
And he starts simplifying his life drastically. Gets his expenses down to, what was it, 1.03 a day.
Incredible austerity.
That wasn't just about saving money, was it? It was a conscious choice.
Exactly. A hallmark of his lifestyle later on, living according to those evolving values.
Then there's that important encounter with a Christian man at his boarding house.
Yeah, that led him to read the Bible.
Which, in turn, made him look more closely at Hindu scriptures. He gained a new appreciation for his own faith and started questioning some of the missionary views he'd heard.
That interfaith dialogue was key. It helped him see the richness in his own tradition, critically examine others, and develop that idea of religious pluralism.
He also talks about navigating temptations, resisting indecent talk, gambling.
Thanks to a warning from a friend, he says, and again, sticking to his vows.
It shows that ongoing effort towards self-control, moral discipline.
And prayer, for him, becomes more than ritual. It's about purifying the heart, cleansing passions, especially with humility.
A deeper, more internal understanding of spiritual practice. As his time in England goes on, he meets Narayan Hemchandra, an unusual character, an Indian writer.
Yeah, quite unconventional.
Yeah.
And a real contrast in how they approached English society.
Gandhi seemed to admire Hemchandra's focus on inner worth, not just appearances. Especially after that encounter with Cardinal Manning, where it seemed like etiquette mattered more than the person.
It reinforces Gandhi's growing skepticism of superficiality, his focus on authenticity, substance over style.
He even squeezed in a trip to the Paris exhibition, saw the Eiffel Tower.
So, still curious about the wider world, technology, even while deep in his studies and personal journey.
And then finally, he's called to the bar. He returns to India in 1891, but feels completely unprepared to actually practice law.
Right. Despite the qualification, that lack of practical confidence is telling, maybe hinting at his later move towards more direct action outside the courtroom.
And those first attempts back in India, trying to be a lawyer, quite revealing. He sets up in Bombay, but finds he literally can't cross-examine witnesses, psychologically blocked.
That's a major hurdle for a lawyer. It suggests maybe an innate discomfort with confrontation, foreshadowing that nonviolent approach later.
So he goes back to Rajkot, starts drafting petitions instead. But even that ends badly after a run-in with a British officer.
Another early taste of injustice, and the limits of his professional role in challenging the system, probably added to a growing disillusionment.
He also had to deal with caste rules back home because of the England trip. He followed the excommunication rules carefully.
But was met with affection, surprisingly, not rejection.
Yeah, it suggests that while he respected tradition, his own character maybe transcended some of those strictures. The human connection mattered.
Even when struggling financially, he absolutely refused to pay commissions for cases. Ethics first.
That early commitment to integrity, even when it hurt him professionally, shows a really strong moral compass was already there.
And that time, he stood up to the political agent who was favoring his brother, choosing principle over family ties.
A powerful example. Shows his deep commitment to justice even when it was difficult personally.
So eventually, he takes the job in South Africa.
A mix of reasons, right? Wanting to leave India, gain experience, support the family.
Even though the job itself was more like being a firm's assistant, not really an independent lawyer.
Yeah. But that decision, driven by all those factors, it just sets the stage for everything that happened next in South Africa.
Absolute transformative.
And those very first experiences there, they give you a taste of what's coming. The journey itself, nearly missing the boat but getting a spot in the captain's cabin.
A little hint of the unexpected twists ahead, maybe.
Then arriving, and Abdullah Sheth, his employer's brother, kind of looking him up and down, thinking he looks expensive and maybe not that useful right away.
Yeah, that initial uncertainty, the cultural differences he had to navigate immediately.
And then, bang! The turban incident in court.
Famous incident.
Told to remove it, refused, defended its significance in the papers, got publicity good in the Indian community, not so good elsewhere.
His first public stand against that kind of prejudice put him on the map within the community there, a direct clash of identity and the dominant culture.
And then it gets much worse on the train, a first-class ticket, but told to move to a lower class just because he's Indian.
Refuses and gets physically thrown off.
Right. And his reaction is crucial. He decides to, quote, pocket the insult. Not react impulsively, but think strategically about a better response later.
That was pivotal. Experiencing that blatant racism firsthand. Despite his status as a lawyer, it was a huge catalyst. And that strategic thinking, not just reacting, that's an early glimpse of satyagraha developing.
Arriving in Pretoria, he meets the attorney, Mr. Coates. Soon after, he's having religious discussions defending Hinduism against proselytizing.
Standing his ground, asserting his own faith's value while still engaging respectfully, showing that growing confidence in his own identity.
He also starts noticing the poor sanitation among Indians in Pretoria and starts talking about unity, forming an association to tackle these things.
The very first seeds of community organizing being planted right there, seeing a shared problem, trying to bring people together.
Then the legal work, the Dada Abdullah case. He just dives into it, wants to understand every single fact, more deeply perhaps than even the people involved.
That meticulousness, that commitment to deeply understanding the facts, that becomes his hallmark, whether it's law or politics later.
And crucially, he pushes for compromise. He manages to get the big dispute between Dada Abdullah and Taib Sheth settled through arbitration.
Yeah, preventing Taib Sheth's ruin.
Yeah.
A major early success.
And it shows his focus on finding solutions that work for everyone, avoiding more conflict. Foreshadows that nonviolent resolution approach.
Definitely. He also becomes very aware of hospitality, how his strict diet and lifestyle might inconvenience his hosts sometimes.
Shows that growing sensitivity, thinking about his impact on others.
He attends a Christian convention, respectful, but still unable to accept Christianity as, like, the ultimate religion.
Consistent theme that respectful engagement, but firm in his own convictions.
And importantly, around this time, he starts seeing problems within Hinduism itself, specifically untouchability.
That internal critique is significant. Willingness to challenge harmful practices within his own community, even deeply rooted ones.
His understanding of Hinduism is also deepened by encountering the Theosophical Society, which took Eastern philosophy seriously.
Gave him another lens, perhaps a more intellectual one, to appreciate Hindu thought.
Then comes the big one, the disenfranchising bill, aimed at taking away Indians' right to vote.
A real turning point. He sees how devastating it would be and decides right then he has to stay and fight it. The farewell party they'd planned for him.
It becomes a working committee meeting.
Exactly. That's the shift from lawyer to activist, realizing legal channels weren't enough, community action was needed.
And the response from the community in Natal is huge. They rally. The petition gets massive support, not just there, but in India, even London. The Times of India, the London Times, write about it.
Shows the power of mobilizing people, using the press strategically. He understood that early on.
The turban issue comes up again. He defends its cultural meaning, but also respects court rules. A balancing act.
Shows that nuanced approach, stand firm on principle, but adapt where necessary without compromising core values.
And he realizes they need something permanent, so he forms the Natal Indian Congress.
Laying the foundation for sustained political action, though getting it funded, collecting subscriptions, that was a challenge right away.
Yeah, practical hurdles. He sets that principle. No borrowed money for public work. Community self-reliance.
Even talks a reluctant host into donating, apparently. Shows his persistence, his belief in financial integrity.
He's constantly organizing meetings, getting people talking, discussing the issues, grassroots mobilization.
Absolutely fundamental to his approach, then and later.
And his focus widens to include the indentured laborers. He sees the terrible condition of one man, Allison Durham.
And takes up his cause, highlighting how badly they were treated compared to other workers, the injustice of the indenture system.
Shows his growing concern for the most exploited people, his willingness to challenge that whole system.
He also sees the poll tax imposed on Indians as a huge mistake by the authorities, leading to a long fight to get it removed.
Understanding the bigger political picture, fighting injustice on multiple fronts.
And that same poll tax issue actually becomes central to his final big campaign in South Africa later on. Caused some friction even with the Collie about how quickly to resolve it.
Shows how his own convictions were solidifying, his willingness to sometimes diverge even from leaders he respected.
All through this, his own religious exploration continues. He becomes good friends with the Waltons, has these really respectful interfaith chats.
Those personal connections across religious lines, they really matter to him.
He's reading widely Hinduism, Islam, other faiths, still learning. He gets some advice from a woman about guiding youth on principles in diet, which seems to resonate with him.
That continuous learning, valuing wisdom from others, it's all part of his journey.
He also has a tough experience, learns a hard lesson about trust when a companion betrays him.
Painful, no doubt, but probably sharpened his judgment, his understanding of people.
And he's still debating big questions like the link between religion and morality with a ship's captain on a voyage.
Always digging into those fundamental ethical questions. What guides us?
And underneath it all, for a long time, there's this deep loyalty to the British Constitution.
Seems odd now, maybe, but it came from a belief in the ideals of justice and fairness he thought the British system represented, or should represent.
He keeps serving the community without pay, constantly thinking about the ethics of accepting gifts, trying to stay purely selfless.
That commitment to service and wrestling with the ethics of recognition, that's constant.
He even volunteers for the Indian Ambulance Corps during the Boer War.
Driven by a sense of duty, wanting to serve, despite the risks.
Yeah, and while it aligned him with the Empire then, it also gave him direct experience of conflict, suffering, and showed what the Indian community could contribute.
Then back in Johannesburg, there's a plague outbreak. He doesn't hesitate. Nurses, patients himself, sets up a temporary hospital, works alongside people like Mr. West.
Just incredible courage and commitment to service in a crisis. Very practical response.
And reading Ruskin's Unto This Last has a huge impact. Leads him to set up Phoenix Settlement.
That communal living experiment. Self-sufficiency, equality, simple living. Putting his ideals into practice.
Creating a real community based on those principles he was developing.
Though getting the printing press working there sounds like it was a struggle. Took real community spirit to overcome the technical problems.
Highlights the hands-on effort, the collaboration needed to build something like that from scratch.
He forms a very close bond with Henry Pollack, like brothers, sharing values.
Those deep friendships, based on shared ideals, were clearly vital support for him.
He's even advising others at Phoenix on marriage, family life, taking on that role of a moral guide within the community.
Shows his expanding influence, not just political, but personal, relational.
And his ideas on educating his own kids at Phoenix focus on character building first, maybe less on traditional academics. Though he reflects on that later, maybe with some mixed feelings.
That emphasis on moral and practical development alongside intellectual growth.
Yeah.
But yeah, acknowledging the complexities.
Then, during the Zulu Rebellion, he serves again with the Indian Volunteer Corps.
And really has to grapple with the ethics of being involved, even non-combatantly, thinking hard about ahimsa in a real-world conflict situation, distinguishing combatants from non-combatants.
It forces him to refine his understanding of nonviolence in these very complex scenarios.
He takes the vow of brahmacharya around this time, not just celibacy, but broader self-control, managing desires, even within marriage.
A huge commitment. Part of that lifelong quest for self-mastery he believed was crucial.
He experiments with fasting, too, as a spiritual practice, but realizes it needs mental discipline alongside it to be truly effective.
That experiential learning again, understanding the inner work needed.
He embraces self-help in everyday tasks, even washing his own clothes.
The dignity of manual labor, self-reliance. Core ideas for him, connecting work with empowerment and equality.
And he finds deep strength in Ramanama, repeating God's name. Faith is a core pillar.
Underscores that deep spiritual dimension guiding his life and work.
So, 1914, he's leaving South Africa, Huge farewells, lots of gifts.
And he struggles with accepting them. Is it right? Does it fit with selfless service? Still questioning?
That rigorous self-examination never stops.
Back in India, he finally meets Gokhale, a major figure.
Yes, the respected nationalist leader. Gokhale becomes a key mentor, guiding him through the complexities of Indian politics.
Which he finds pretty overwhelming at first. He attends an Indian National Congress session in Bombay, feels lost, not ready to speak.
Gets advice from Sir Firoza Shah Mehta. Write your speeches out first.
A different world from South Africa. He needed to adapt.
He visits the India Club and notices a kind of indifference among some of the elite there towards bigger social problems.
Probably strengthened his resolve to connect with ordinary people, address those issues directly.
He travels, visits institutions in Calcutta, studies how they work, speaks about the ambulance corps work in the Boer War.
Observing, learning, sharing his experiences.
Then he gets the idea for the third-class train tour across India.
To really see firsthand how ordinary people lived and traveled, the cow was skeptical at first, apparently.
But came around. And that commitment to direct experience, understanding the reality of the masses, that was crucial for Gandhi.
And what he saw was shocking. Terrible sanitation, lack of basic facilities for most travelers.
Solidified his understanding of the systemic problems, fueled that desire for change.
He visits Benares, the holy city, goes to the Kashi Vishwanath temple, but feels disappointed by the commercialism, the lack of a truly spiritual atmosphere.
And later, finds his own fame, his Mahatma status, actually gets in the way of having a proper darshan, seeing the deity because of the crowds.
The ironies of fame, the complexities of religious practice.
He does briefly go back to law in Rajkot, handles cases with his usual honesty.
Even when up against experienced lawyers, ethics first.
And when his son Manal gets sick, he opts for hydropathy, water cure, over conventional medicine.
Sticking to his belief in natural remedies, even for his family, though he had support from a like-minded doctor.
His views on things like insurance also change. He starts questioning the need for it, leaning more towards self-reliance, trust in providence.
Fits with that broader philosophy of simplicity, less dependence on external systems.
He discovers earth bandage treatments, finds they work for various things, writes a guide to health.
Which becomes surprisingly popular, shows his interest in natural healing and sharing that knowledge.
Then there's the milk vow dilemma. He'd vowed to give up cow's milk,
but eventually compromises on goat's milk for health reasons, while acknowledging it wasn't quite the spirit of the original vow.
Shows the practical challenges of sticking to absolute vows, the need for self-evaluation, adaptation.
And he's still fighting battles from South Africa, tackling corruption in the Transvaal administration, gathering evidence, even after returning to India.
That long-term commitment to causes, seeing things through.
Okay, now we get to Satyagraha really taking root in India. Champaran, that's huge.
Absolutely pivotal. The indigo farmers, exploited by the Tinkathia system, forced to grow indigo.
He goes, investigates thoroughly, listens to them, and leads this incredibly successful nonviolent campaign against the landlords.
It was a massive demonstration of his methods working in India, tackling deep-seated injustice, really established his leadership nationally.
Then comes the Ahmedabad mill workers' strike. A different scenario, industrial dispute.
He navigates it carefully, pushing for arbitration between workers and owners, and undertakes a fast himself to support the workers' demands.
Shows the flexibility of Satyagraha, applying it to different kinds of conflict, using non-violent pressure effectively.
Followed by the Kita Satyagraha farmers protesting unfair taxes during hardship.
These early campaigns just cemented his leadership and showed everyone the power of non-violent resistance on a large scale in India.
And all through this, his conviction about Hindu-Muslim unity is unwavering. He sees it as absolutely essential.
A fundamental test for ahimsa for India's future.
Yeah, a central pillar of his vision.
He gets involved with the Khilafat movement, supporting Muslim concerns about the Ottoman Caliphate. He also raises ethical questions about joining war conferences because of secret treaties.
Shows him engaging with broader national, even international politics, always with that ethical lens.
Then there's that controversial period recruiting for the British Army in Quetta during the war.
While also criticizing the Arms Act that disarmed Indians. It's complex.
And he gets seriously ill during that campaign, nearly dies.
It highlights the complexities, maybe even contradictions, in his actions at times, and the immense personal cost of his commitments, even as his views evolved.
Then the Rowlatt Act comes in really repressive laws. He's strongly opposed, plans immediate action.
But then the Jallianwala Bagh massacre happens in Amritsar, and the British ban him from entering Punjab.
A horrific event. His opposition to the act, his reaction to the massacre, that really shifted things, galvanized the nationalist movement.
He sees the violence and repression that follows in Bombay and elsewhere. His commitment to nonviolence stays firm, even when things get messy, even when some people misuse the idea.
Right, leading him to temporarily suspend civil disobedience because it wasn't being practiced purely.
That willingness to pause, to reassess, when the movement strayed from nonviolence, it shows his deep commitment to the principle itself, ethical rigor.
He investigates the horrors of martial law in Punjab, presides over the Congress session in Amritsar, pushes for rights for Indians overseas, for Hindi as a national language.
Solidifying his national leadership, focusing on key issues for the future.
And then, Khadi, the whole movement for self-sufficient cloth production.
A fascinating story in itself. Setting up looms in the ashram, the struggle to find spinning wheels, finding skilled spinners like Ganga bin Majmundar.
And finally, mastering and popularizing the charkha, the spinning wheel.
Khadi became such a powerful symbol. Economic self-reliance, empowering people, resisting colonial economics in a very tangible way.
He fully embraces it as part of Swadeshi self-reliance, Indian-made goods, and then he pushes for the big one, the non-cooperation resolution.
Telling people to withdraw cooperation from the British government, there was resistance, skepticism within Congress at first.
Yeah, at the Calcutta and Nagpur sessions, but he prevails, and Swaraj, self-rule, is explicitly named as the goal. Big figures like Motilal Nehru, C.R. Das join in.
That non-cooperation movement was a major escalation, united so many different groups under that banner of nonviolent struggle for independence.
So thinking about the bigger picture, his vision, his legacy, his very definition of civilization.
Voluntary restriction of wants, simple living, high thinking.
A really profound challenge to materialism.
And a philosophy that still resonates today with movements focused on sustainability, ethical living.
He insisted that the means justify the end. Righteousness, morality were essential even in fighting for Swaraj.
And that passion for religious pluralism. We are Indians first. Nationality over religious division.
Such important ideas, ethical means, secular identity, still incredibly relevant discussions today.
But his vision faced that huge challenge. The rise of Muslim nationalism, the partition of India.
A tragedy that went against everything he worked for. He spent his last years trying to stop the violence, heal the wounds.
It was a devastating outcome for him. His efforts during the partition violence show his deep anguish, but also that unwavering commitment to peace till the very end.
And then his assassination. By a Hindu nationalist who hated his stance on Pakistan, his defense of Indian Muslims.
A terrible loss, a stark reminder of the divisions, and a tragic end for a life dedicated to unity.
But his autobiography, those experiments with truth, it endures as a powerful record of that journey, that relentless search.
And his ideas, especially on nonviolent resistance, they truly changed the world, influenced so many movements, so many leaders.
Yet, as we said at the start, his legacy isn't simple. Those views on race, on sex, they're being critically examined now.
And that reevaluation is necessary for a full, honest picture, acknowledging the massive contributions, but also the limitations seen from today's perspective within his historical context.
His core ideas, though, truth and ahimsa, nonviolence, for him they were inseparable. The way to realize, as he put it, the universal and all-pervading spirit of truth.
And getting involved in politics, for him, wasn't separate from that. It flowed directly from his devotion to truth.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways that really stand out? For me, it's that relentless pursuit of truth through personal experiment, that evolving, deeply thought-out application of nonviolence, the lifelong work for religious harmony, and just how complex and debated his legacy remains.
And connecting that back to you, the listener, what really comes through is that challenge of understanding historical figures fully. You have these incredible achievements, but often alongside views that seem problematic now. It requires critical thinking, understanding the context they lived in.
Absolutely. Which leads us to a final thought for you to chew on. Thinking about Gandhi's own lifelong search for truth, his rigorous self-critique, how do we, today, grapple with the complexities, the contradictions in these figures who shaped our world? How does understanding their struggles, their evolving beliefs, inform our own search for truth and justice now?
It's a really important question.
Definitely something to ponder. We'd encourage you to look at the sources yourselves, maybe read more of his writings, explore the history further, and, form your own nuanced understanding.